Hello, my friends, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Campaign Mode podcast, the podcast that takes a look at the world, the intersection of gaming and brands. We deconstruct the world of gaming for brands and brands for gaming. We talk about the magic that happens in that intersection. My name is Dan Bennett. I'm your host. I'm 20 years experience. Oof, it's a long time. 20 years experience in the brand and marketing world, and probably double that, not quite double that, as a gamer. So this is a combination of those two passions. We dive into all sorts of things that live in the world between those two things. On today's podcast, we have my good friend, the CEO of 368, Paul Leys. Paul is a brilliant, insightful guy. Our conversation was could have gone on for a long time, but it's a good one. You may have heard of 368 because 368 is a business that was founded by a mutual friend of Paul and mine, Casey Neistat, and Casey started 368 2 years ago, something like that, with the ambition to be a service to content creators, obviously something very close to his heart, and help those guys professionalize what it is they love. Now, 368's come on since then, and Paul and I talk about that, but crucially, they've added gaming to what it is they do. So 368 Gaming, important part of the gaming ecosystem now. They work with a lot of very famous brands, very famous gamers and game platforms, and they've really found this unique alchemy within the space they operate out of on Broadway in New York City. I'm fascinated by them. I'm fascinated by Paul, and we had a really good conversation about how we can play in that intersection of brands and gaming and business and gamers and all that good stuff. So without further waffle, I'm going to hand over to Zoom Dan and Zoom Paul, and I hope you enjoy it. Take it away. Okay, welcome to week 3 of the Campaign Mode podcast. And I'm really pleased to have on today's show a good friend of mine and somebody I think is going to be fascinating for us to pick their brains of a little bit. And that is Paul Leys, the CEO of 368. 368 being the content and gaming business that Paul and Casey Neistat started 2 years ago, Paul?
2018, April 2018.
So welcome to the show, man. I thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I get to hang with you frequently, at least pre-corona pretty frequently, but now we get to chat in this slightly more sort of techie situation.
Okay.
Nice to see you, dude.
I like your the corona haircut.
Yeah,
you really changed it up.
Yeah, I did. I can't get to a barber to get my usual coif, so I just took it down to the grain, man. I took it down to this is coming in though. How about that?
Looking good, looking sharp.
You can talk. Look at that mane. That's beautiful. How's life?
It is kind of looking a little mane-ish.
I love it.
Like I have to comb it back, but it just kind of goes wider.
You can pretend it's not sexy if you want. It's sexy. We all know that. Come on. Even up in the wilds of wherever you are, look at those trees.
This is what I wanted to get into, by the way, in this podcast.
Haircuts.
So we'll just keep going down this path.
It's a haircut. It is a haircut-based podcast.
Right.
At least that's what I hope it becomes. So listen, dude, I know all about you, but for all of our listeners around the world, let's get the 5-minute Paul Leys. Give us some background. You go as far back as you want, or as most recent as you want. Whatever you think makes you sound most interesting.
Well, I think the interesting stuff is the most current stuff. So it's like, I started 368 with Casey a few years ago, just under the idea that there was a new way to work with creators. And before that, had always been sort of on the marketing side with brands, agencies, etc. You and I have a lot of that in common. But I was always working in social media, whether it was building Facebook widgets and doing sort of like back in the day viral videos and that kind of stuff, everything, whatever anyone was asking for in sort of the new media space. And eventually that led me to working with Casey and a whole network of creators with Samsung. And it was sort of like going through earlier days of YouTube when there was daily vlogging, and sort of building relationships with those bloggers at the time. That was sort of like the thing on YouTube. And you know, building relationships with them that wasn't sort of like the contractual agent thing, like, hey, I'm hiring you for a job, but I actually tried to get to know them. Casey, to his credit, kind of like really sort of like pulled me along there. And it just sort of made us realize that like the traditional agent Hollywood model that was being applied to these internet creators wasn't, just felt weird, didn't feel like a good fit. So we kind of started 368 with this mission of, all right, let's help creators and let's figure out a different way to connect creators with brands. And somewhere in there, there's a business. And, you know, over the past 2 years, we've sort of evolved and we've found those different business opportunities.
So one of the things that I love about 368, and I know is central to how you guys think about it as a business, quite different than some of the other folks we've had on the show so far. You know, those guys have platforms, products, businesses. Like we had Andy Miller last week from Energy, who has is a business in an esports team. What you guys have is a hub, right? You have a space,
right,
a physical environment, a home, if you like, for creators and gamers, a place where brand people and business people can go and interact with this environment. How central is that vibe? And, you know, having spent plenty of time within the walls of 368, it's not a cliche to say that there's a family vibe in there. How key is that?
I think that's what makes it different. You know, it is, it's a point of connection for, just as you described, you know, it's creators connecting with each other. It's, you know, people from the brand world connecting with creators. And the reason the vibe, as you describe it in there, is different is because it's more personal. And so it's like, it's about building relationships. And because it's like, it's like anything in the world when you're doing business. When you have a relationship with somebody, it's much easier to understand their point of view and what it is you could do with them or you could do together. And you know, create an environment where you're nurturing the same thing with internet creators. You know, they're helping each other because they're understanding each other better. Each one's unique, making different types of content. They have different audiences, but they're learning from each other. And same thing with brands. And so it's just, you know, it's real relationship building and then figuring out ways to work together.
So you know, the campaign mode podcast, or the campaign mode idea, and this won't be a surprise to you, being as we know each other, but the idea that before brands and businesses can be relevant in gaming, in the gaming world, with gamers, with content creators, those brands themselves have to make themselves part of that mix, right? It isn't like the old media tropes of being able to buy against a certain property if you had enough money and be present in that space. So how do you, and that's largely the sort of mission of this campaign mode idea, is to try and help brands understand and get into that, but also crucially help gamers and folks in the gaming community understand the business side of it. How do you bring, and you guys work with some of the biggest brands in the world, how do you bring those brands along on that journey? Because, you know, from what I've seen, you do it very differently than a lot of other agencies, companies, studios, businesses.
Yeah. You know, one of the things where you started there in your commentary was, you know, it's not the old days of like brands just being able to buy their way into this audience. You know, like anything on the internet, it's about earning credibility. And, you know, people on the internet see straight through bullshit. And sort of that very cliche message of authenticity and finding your truth and all that kind of stuff is real. And so brands that, enter into call gaming a community, they enter into this community in a really supportive way. They earn credibility to like share other opportunities. So, for us, it's like brands trying to get into gaming. It's like support the little guys. You start, it's baby steps, start small. If you go in with a giant splash and you buy Ninja, for example, it looks like you're being a little opportunistic there versus then really trying to understand the community. And so it's a little bit of a grassroots thing. And I think that's what makes us a little unique, that yes, we work with creators, of all shapes and sizes, big guys, little guys. But what gets us most excited is the more aspirational creators, the ones that are just getting started, that are doing really unique things, that are still building their sort of creative process and their audience. And because when you're new, you can be more experimental. It's like once you get bigger and you're sort of like you've got sort of that creative stability, what to do and what to deliver. It's not as malleable. And so for brands to work with smaller creators, it makes them look like they're supporting the community when it's somebody that they're just getting to know. And that one of the ideas behind 368 as an organization is that in the perfect world, if we become a brand that has more scale on social platforms, we can then elevate and showcase smaller creators on the 368 brand, and therefore, giving those smaller creators larger scale with an audience, which enables them to work with brands. So, therefore, letting brands work with the small creators. So it's a little bit of like, that's where we sit. And I think that's sort of like the more authentic way for brands to kind of like get involved with gaming.
So I've been to events in the 368 space with you where you've actually been focused solely on, in that case it was creators, but it was up and coming small creators, and you were hosting, free, if they could get a ticket, but free events for them to come and speak with each other, be inspired by some slightly larger creators. It wasn't something that that was brand sponsored, but there were some very senior brand people in that audience, if I remember correctly. But you can do that, right? 368 can do that because they have Paul Leys, who has a very experienced and senior brand side market business guy. They have Casey Neistat, obviously, who's one of the world's best known and largest YouTube and film content creators. But what I feel about, when I see it in action, is that neither of those two things matter, because what you do is make it all about the nucleus of the 368 organization and operation, which is the content creators, and be them gaming or filmmakers. Does it feel like that's something that feels like a page that brands could apply to any of their business, right?
Rephrase that. How brands would apply.
The brand, well, let me put it differently then. The brand doesn't need to consider itself central, right? It perhaps even shouldn't consider it central. I know that some of the work that Casey's done that was most successful, was taking a brand brief and saying, no, that's actually not how I work. And if you want to communicate most effectively with my audience, I'm going to tell the story this way. A brand almost needs to get out of its own way sometimes. I think you mentioned speaking with smaller creators, which makes a ton of sense. But how can they create an environment like that? Obviously, they can come and work with 368. But is there opportunity, do you think, for them to be a bit more philanthropic in how they think about supporting the creator community?
Yes. I think like the more that you're seeing sort of like brands invest, like I know that buying big media on big social platforms is like, I'm a believer in the content more so than the context around it. But the two do work hand in hand. And I think the brand showing a presence on those platforms, be it Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, Twitch, you start to see that contextually, and you start to understand, oh, these are brands that are supporting the creator community on this platform when the messaging is right, you know. And I think that's maybe that's the lightning in a bottle, unicorn, what is it, the thing that everyone tries to capture is what's the perfect message for this platform, so it makes us look good, it makes us look like we fit in here. So the same can be said for, you know, in a much smaller way, experientially at 368. It's like the brands that support us and sort of like say, we're fine kind of standing in the background here, and this is, you know, we want this to be your story. When you're there, you notice the things around you. You notice the brands that are supporting the 368 community, and you know, inherently, you just have like a better feeling about that brand. You know, you think they're cool,
right?
And that becomes somebody you want to work with. Yeah, somebody that becomes somebody you want to talk about. And you know, if your cards are played right, and then you do actually get to talk about that brand or talk with that brand, you now have background, you have context, you have the thing that you did a year ago or you saw somebody else do, and you have some like reference points, so you can start interpreting all of those messages into sort of your own voice or whatever the objective is with the brand.
So if you boil it down, it's about brands, because I look at the brand space and I look at the gaming space, and I think, you know, in relation to the size and scope of you know, the marketing budgets of brands globally, their ability and what they're currently doing when it comes to gaming is just, it's so much the tip of the iceberg. You know, there are so few brands effectively activating within the gaming space. So a lot of those brands that aren't doing it right now, you know, I think sort of some of my advice to them is to start doing what you're talking about, which is ostensibly is to start building their own narrative in that space, building their own authenticity, so that when gamers, platforms, audiences look at them, they realize actually they do have a story here. They haven't just come along and bought Ninja and never done anything before, right? They've done what, and I don't know how much you want to talk about some of the brands you work with, but some of the brands you work with do a lot of that very grassroots activation with you, are very present in the 368 space. So when over time they start turning up more frequently and in more engaged ways with bigger gamers, bigger audiences, bigger platforms, they're part of that story rather than just being an adjunct to it. I think that's a large part of what a lot of brands need to go at. Let's flip this over for a second and talk about the gamer side, right? The up and comers, you know, the streaming. Just to use Twitch, for example, new streamers in the last 6 weeks have gone through the roof, right? Because a lot of people are at home, not much else to do. You still get cameras from Amazon. How are those? So perhaps let's not think about the broader mass audience yet, but how about the next level, the semi-pro? Those guys, you and I know a few of them who are, they do it because they're passionate about it, but the opportunity potentially for them is to become pro. How do you think, what is your perspective on how those young up and coming guys and girls can be part of this brand conversation, besides just, you know, lining up outside to get into 368, but how do they start to think about professionalizing what it is they do?
There's a couple layers. There's a couple layers in that question. Because one of the first things that kind of jumps out at me is sort of like, you have these people that are streaming content, and they're really more of like a entertainment sort
Right.
of, the value that they're creating or what they're sort of pursuing is more entertainment driven than trying to be a competitive gamer.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is what people have realized, this sort of like quarantine moment of people spending more time on gaming platforms like Twitch. Let's call Twitch a gaming platform. It's live streaming, um, but it's forced people to because they've experienced it now, to be like, wait a second. So gaming's not just like a competitive thing. It's not just sort of like people that are professionally trying to compete at some huge event as part of a team at Barclays Center or whatever. It's Gaming is just this social experience now. It's becoming its own social platform. It's how people connect. It's sort of like that thing that they have to do together. So content creators are starting to emerge around um, sort of a different version of gaming. It's like, I think a lot of like the big media companies, even when they're trying to get into gaming, it was basically like watching ESPN and
Right.
ESPN2, and has done a lot in gaming and esports in the past couple of months. But it's sort of like you're talking about this competitive thing, and instead of it being sort of this cultural thing, maybe this is a little cliche to compare it to, but it's like the same way MTV sort of created culture. It started in music, but then it became something that was much wider, that was just something everyone could connect to. It's sort of like that's the kind of content, the kind of media that I think hasn't quite emerged, but is about to. It's like it's going to, and that's what, as a company like 368, that's what we want to be pioneers of. We're not certainly not the only ones. There's like a lot of companies and doing the same thing, but it's because everyone realizes there's a kind of content within gaming that is just more cultural driven than competitive. And so when you describe sort of these emerging gamers, I think of them more as content creators than as somebody that's trying to hit the professional circuit.
Right.
And so it's like any kind of content, it has sort of a vertical and an interest area. And, I think the opportunity for content creators in gaming is sort of like, think about a wider audience. It's like all of the gaming branding and sort of like the lighting, it all feels very sort of like male dominant, like dark colors, and like it feels like the the old dark arcade days or something, and go to see what Apple or Google are doing on their website and their respective gaming sites. It's like, it's bright, it's white, it sort of just appeals to something much wider. It doesn't feel like something only high school boys do. It feels like something I do with my friends when I'm in my 30s,
Yeah.
or just with my girlfriend and her friends. And I think that's sort of like coming back around. It's like, okay, so think about your content through that lens, because there's an audience yet that hasn't engaged in gaming content because it's not because they're not interested in gaming. It's just like the content's not for them, is not there yet.
It's funny, I
But
think about NKBHD, right? Marquez's say when you
Mhm.
look at how he thinks about and approaches tech reviews. Now, admittedly, he shoots on Red, right? Big following,
Yeah,
big studio, so there's some
yeah,
bandwidth there to make it look different. But it does look different. It looks polished. It looks light and bright, and then when you watch a lot of other, I've been watching a lot of tech reviews recently, trying to dial in a lot of the stuff for this. the rest of them all look kind of similar, right? To your point, they're dark and they feel male dominated. And it is true of especially Twitch, when you look at a lot of the streams that are running on that right now, there is very little differentiation. But going back to the point about them being professional, I don't think about it, but just pertinent to it not being an esports question, but being a question more in the world of 368. What they are doing is sort of following the trend or the track of some of those early content producers, or even more recent content producers, that were still looking to professionalize what they did so that they could get paid to do their passion, right? And I feel like there is a ton of them coming up, but there's also a lot of brands, there's a lot of businesses looking to find their cohort, their team of streamers, gamers, whatever it is, that fit with them. And it strikes me that, to build on your point a little, their opportunity, if you think about them as individual brands themselves from a gaming or streaming point of view, is to think about how they might gear themselves towards those partners which will help support what they do beyond just the streaming dollars, right?
Right.
That fascinates me. And I know that's something you guys do spend quite a lot of time on and thinking about and programming within the space. So I don't really have.
It's like, I mean, I guess it's another way to think about that is, if you're a creator, think about the kinds of brands that you would want to work with.
Right.
And if you want to work with Red Bull, you kind of have an idea of the kind of person and a creator you would be that Red Bull's gonna think is a great person for their squad.
Right.
But think of a tougher one. If you want to work with Mercedes,
right?
What do you have to look like? What does your channel look like? What is the tone that you use, the language you use? It's just like all of the little inputs that you're packaging and putting into, broadcast, should complement a brand as premium as Mercedes.
Right.
And so it's sort of like, there's not a clear answer there, but it kind of changes your point of view and helps you understand the nuances that you would need to be paying attention to.
Right.
To be all of a sudden be more relevant to the non-endemic brands. They're sort of like brands that are sitting on the sidelines right now wondering what to do. They haven't quite seen the creator from the gaming world that feels like them. So it's hard
to boil
for
it
those
down
markets.
Then it's about, I suppose, thinking about who their demographic are a little bit, right? So themselves, their mates, but who else? What does that broader demo look like? What brands are relevant to that demographic? And indeed, should that be their demographic, right? And I don't mean to say they should be anything other than themselves, because that wouldn't work. You have to be yourself. You have to be true to what it is you do. But if you're able to evolve what it is you do to be relevant to a different, broader, bigger demographic and break out of the, like we said, looks the same, sounds the same crowd.
Yeah.
That's how I know from my past that, we would help brands recognize talent, recognize, in this case, streamers or whatever. So I want to ask
the throwback, the throwback example is Casey. It's like in daily vlogging. It's like daily vlogging existed before Casey, but it just didn't feel high quality. It just, it didn't feel like something a brand would want to be a part of.
Right.
And then all of a sudden this filmmaker came along and he was like, oh, I get to make a little movie every single day.
Yeah.
And his approach, that creative approach, it wasn't that his technology was any better. It was just sort of like storytelling about his day felt different.
Yeah.
And it felt like something that brands wanted to be a part of. And, that's a big component of Casey's storytelling is the greatest component of his success, but also brands wanting to be a part of it, makes it, a business. It's something you can do.
My ambition is to get him on this at some point when he's free. But one of the things, I've always felt with Casey, it is not only is he hyper creative, an amazing storyteller, filmmaker, but he's a very shrewd businessman, right? He understands how his audience, how his demographic think. He feels like he's one of them, which is why he's so relatable. But to that extent, he also knows which brands, he should and shouldn't work with, which brands fit with that audience. Going back to my point about understanding your demographic, who are your cohort, what's your tribe? I feel like he was always really good at that. One of his most famous films being the Nike piece, or even the Mercedes work. On paper, you look at Mercedes and you might not think that it was a fit for him, but he took it and made it a fit for that tribe. And I think you're right, there's a lot of parallels that could be learned there for young emerging gaming and streamers and content creators. Let's move on to something. It's the unavoidable question, the unavoidable elephant in the room, which is the COVID, the coronavirus, which is changing the landscape of lots of things, but it's changing really rapidly the landscape of gaming and content creation. How are you seeing it, not just in the physical space, because you guys have a space in New York City, which obviously is following the rules right now, and therefore closed to a broader audience. But what are you seeing? What trends are you seeing happening? What have you noticed? And do you have any thoughts on what our world is going to look like when eventually, we come out the other side? I'm not going to say that's normal, but when we come out of this on the other side.
Yeah. I don't know what it's going to look like, but one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is what's going to happen to sort of, well, in the near term, what's going to happen to sort of traditional production, and sort of like the union model around traditional production. It almost requires that there's like 83 people on set to film some little thing. And, you can't have 83 people on set right now, so that's not going to work. And, but those rules are in stone. So I don't know how the rules that are carved in stone change so that, there's a more flexible approach to creating content again. And that's sort of like why creators right now have such an opportunity, is because they own the entire process and they know how to create content from the beginning of the idea to the final edit better than anyone else. So that's a thing that now people are scrambling around trying to figure out. There was I don't know the name of the production company, but it was just like somebody sent me this Wall Street Journal article this morning, and a production company sort of like adapted what they do as a business, and they were sanitizing like production equipment, mic, headphones, camera, like everything you would need for like a mini professional production. They were sanitizing it and then delivering it to people. And so it's like, if you had to produce content, you got to make it yourself, but we'll give you like all those tools and they'll be perfectly clean.
Right.
And so I think they were, coming up with a clever way to make use of like probably all this gear that was just sitting in storage.
It's a smart idea. And not only that, look at CNN or any of the channels, they're all presenting from home, right? So presumably somebody is bringing gear in, setting it up, to some extent teaching them how to use it. I'm sure they don't have, I'm sure it's not just them in that room, but it is a brilliant point that the dawning of the age of the creator, which we're long into now. If we're well past dawn, we're probably deep into brunch, the brunch of the creator right now. But those individual talented creators, streamers, whatever it is, really, really, really are at the beginning of a very, very interesting time, I think.
Yeah. And the second sort of like observation that, again, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I just think like the whole world of, I think people will now more clearly understand the difference between influencers and creators,
Yeah.
which sort of like intuitively we've spent a lot of time talking about it. But, you know, influencer marketing, you're buying eyeballs, and you may not be as concerned about sort of what the creative approach is on the other side of that. Just give me your reach. But creating content with a creator makes you appreciate whatever's on the other side of that. What's the content going to look like, and is it working? So, you know, I think that as creators become more important of a channel, mainly because like right now they're the only ones that can make content and they've got an audience. So, and as brands sort of like get back to doing business again, they're going to be paying attention to conversion rates and is stuff working. And so creators have to be more thoughtful. It's like if you're going to have a business here working with brands, it actually needs to work. And there's this thing in China. Have you ever heard of it's key opinion leaders, KOLs? There's a business, I don't know if it's called KOLs or if it's businesses about KOLs.
Right.
But a key opinion leader is sort of China's version of an influencer. But instead of key opinion leaders being sort of like eyeballs and audience, they're just sales tools.
Right.
So it's just like a key opinion leader they have a point of view about headphones. So if you want to sell headphones, that key opinion leader needs to like believe in your headphones, and then they sell your headphones. That's where you get your conversion from. So, you know, they focus on like all of these niche opinion leaders, and that's their then sales channel. And sort of as e-commerce becomes more and more important, we've already seen like 30% of retail shift over to e-commerce now or something like that. You know, they're going to be looking for new ways to sell things.
Right.
And so creators who sort of like fall into that category of like, oh, you're a specialist of this, I'll just buy anything you tell me to.
Right. You know, it's funny because I think about that key opinion piece, and I do know what you're talking about. There's a brilliant documentary on that actually. And I think gaming platforms, the games themselves have huge opportunities in that regard as well, right? I mean, I think about Fortnite and what they did the week before last or whenever it was with Travis Scott. So we recognize that platform is part game, part social media experience, right? In fact, it ticks a lot of entertainment boxes broadly. But what it's become as well is an opportunity to be a storefront, right? In this case, a stage. But, you know, 12.5 million, I think they got 12.5 million active engagements on that first day. That's huge. That outweighs so many other places that Travis Scott could take his new material to. And that's the platform itself playing that role, right? And that's why this gaming, the dynamic between gaming and brands, gamers and brands, and I include content creators, I include creators in that mix. For me, so fascinating and warrants so much conversation, and there's so much opportunity for brands to authentically grow by tapping into it appropriately, and by gamers, content creators to professionalize what it is they do, what they love. If they can understand the other side of the equation too. Right. And that's why, you know, 368 is very dear to my heart, because it's a lot of that is core to what you guys set out to do every day and do really creatively every day. So I realize I'm looking over here at my mixer, we're at 30-ish minutes. So
yeah, what's the ideal length there? What kind of?
You know, it used to be that we would say, okay, we'll try and be half an hour-ish, because that's about the average commute. Right? Yeah. But the average commute now, I said this last week, is about 40 seconds from your bedroom and, to your kitchen. So that's all out the window. We can be as long as we want.
Right.
We can just live stream this and riff for an afternoon if you want.
Good.
That's fine.
People's commute is cut down to 40 seconds. A good time to start a podcast.
Right, exactly, right. Exactly. This businessman over here realized the opportunity, right? The good news is the commute's been cut down, but people have got sod all to do throughout most of the day. So I think the opportunity to switch something on that might be compelling, perhaps is higher than it's ever been. And it's
so I here's a little interesting nugget. I talked to this guy from the music industry the other day, and Spotify playlists of like the ambient kind of music, like lo-fi beats and everything. The listenership on those playlists is going through the roof because people are just at home and you're doing stuff, so you just want music in the background.
Right.
And so he is now setting up a music label that is working with musicians to create more ambient sounds. So because the listenership on the platform, on Spotify, like you may have a hit over on your artist channel, but if you have like some really cool ambient song that lands on like 13 of those playlists, it's actually going to kill your single, So even like successful artists are getting interested in creating different forms of music that is more designed for sort of this like background, and I guess it's the new elevator music.
You realize when I edit this, behind you over the last minute is going to be some beautiful ambient rainfall bird song music, just to really just to bring that point home, because I can do that, right? I've got all the tech now. I know what's going on. Listen,
well, that's what Ecamm does. We were talking about Ecamm earlier in live streams. It's like Ecamm allows you to like throw some little soft music behind your live stream.
It's great. Listen, non-sponsored.
We need some spa music. We should get some spa music behind this.
I can put it into, I bought the mixer here. I can throw in sounds to this, but the best I've got are these like, there's like a crappy round of applause and stuff. So maybe next time we chat, as a now regular recurring guest on the Campaign Mode podcast, I'll have like some ambient stuff just for me and you to chill out to.
Okay.
This has been great, dude. I'm so grateful you would come on and chat with me. I really appreciate it. So I'm gonna give you your afternoon back, and you can go outside and ramble in the countryside. But I want to thank Paul Leys, the CEO of 368, for joining us this week on the Campaign Mode podcast. And you'll come back and do it again, won't you? I know you will.
Yeah. Good, I love hanging out with you.
I appreciate it, dude, very much.
All right.
We will we'll end it there, bud. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, cool. Good to see you, Dan.
Okay. Paul Leys, everybody. What a guy. Thank you for joining us, Paul. He's such a smart, insightful fella. I love talking to him. And usually I talk to him face-to-face, which is a much more human experience. And I promise you, in the next few weeks, when we come out of the other side of this thing, I will have Paul come join us at Campaign Mode HQ, and we'll do something face-to-face. Now, if you want to learn more about 368, I would recommend you follow them on social, in the various different social medias. They put a lot of stuff out and they're interesting. They do have a website. You can check that out. I'll link all this stuff in the show notes. If you want to reach out to Campaign Mode, you want to ask us questions, connect with us, send us some love, you can also do that. The information will be in the show notes. I recommend that. I don't know if I need to tell you guys to like and subscribe and hit notifications, but it's 2020. You probably know that you have to do that if you want to hear from us when we upload. I recommend you do it. In the next few weeks, we have some super interesting people coming on to chat with us, more in the vein of Paul and last week's guest Andy and Earl Patton from the week before. So if you like that trend, if you love the sort of people we're talking to, because I like talking to them, and I assume that other people would like to hear from them because they're brilliant minds, then like, subscribe, and do all the things I just told you I didn't need to remind you to do. In the meantime, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to tell you to stay healthy. Listen to as many of the rules as you can. I guess that's important to say. But otherwise, try Try and spend some time playing video games, enjoying yourself, and we'll see you next week on the Campaign Mode Podcast. Thank you for joining us.